some of our partners in funding and time that they've contributed, both the Leech Lake Band of Ojibwe, Division of Resource Management, the USDA Forest Service, both the Chippewa National Forest and the the Northern Research Station, the Leech Lake Tribal College, and least but not least the Lake States Fire Science Consortium. So just to give you a little background on Sunken Lake, that's the background of this first slide, and the history of it is in the back of the foreground there, the opposite tree line, where the little arrow is here, that was an old esker, basically sand that turn of the century when the lake levels were high. It started overflowing the esker and basically sunk the lake probably 15 to 20 feet in a matter of hours over probably like the 1915 time frame. So just a little bit about how the project got its name. So a little bit about the purpose and need for a project like this. We have a history of well-documented pre-1900 fire history in the area. As you can see from the picture right here, Dr. Mike Stambaugh did a lot of dendrochronological work both within the Chippewa National Forest and the Cutfoot Experimental Forest, looking at fire frequencies and severities over time from the 1900s, and you can date back as far as the early 1600s. Since the 1900s, though, there's been a lack of frequent surface fires in the forest, both with fire suppression and also just a lack of applied management of prescribed fire. And due to that, we've seen a declining fire-dependent communities over time with compositional shifts in species, as well as the loss of ground layer plants with cultural importance, such as the blueberry. Some of the project goals are to reintroduce fire into the fire-dependent communities by using prescribed fire to emulate natural disturbance regimes. We will base the treatments on the historic, more frequent intervals and allow for varying degrees of fire severity. We would also like to reduce the hardwood component of mostly maple and oak, as well as aspen in both the understory and the overstory. And with repeated entries, we hope to increase the amount of fire-dependent species in abundance on the landscape. We also would like to increase regeneration opportunities for fire-tolerant pine species by allowing more chances of overstory for mortality and opening up the canopy with repeated prescribed burning. We'd also like to promote fire-dependent native ground layer plant communities and reduce the fuels in the fire-dependent communities from an average of 18 tons per acre to about 6 tons per acre. So how does this project fall into meeting the forest plan objectives? Well, it meets objectives by treating areas of the highest fire risk to minimize the effects of unwanted wildland fire. It also reduces the fuels and controls vegetation in the understory of stands that historically had naturally occurring low-intensity surface fires, as well as providing ecological conditions to sustain populations of native species and to achieve objectives for management, indicator species, and habitats. Right here is an example of one of those old fire-scarred red pine that dates probably back 250 years in one of the control stands. It also meets forest plan objectives by establishing, maintaining, or improving the vegetative conditions using prescribed fire and or other tools. And it restores structural diversity and ecosystem processes within the stands when harvesting or burning by retaining a diverse mix of trees, shrubs, and herbs both live and dead wood, as well as coarse woody debris and patches of live trees. It allows us in the experimental forest to have more flexibility to allow greater amounts of tree mortality and also as well increased and variable fire effects. The picture right here is Josh Craigthorpe. He's a Northern Research Station researcher next to the champion tree in the Cutfoot Experimental Forest, which is about a 250-year-old 33-inch red pine that's located within one of the control stands for the project. So why is the Cutfoot Experimental Forest a good spot to put a fire restoration project like this on the ground? We have inventory plot data throughout the study area that dates to 1940, where we basically know all the tree species from a 1 foot height and greater from 1940 that's stem mapped at a 4x5 chain grid across the entire project area. We know the management history since the logging era. The forest was established in 1936, but we have research on the forest that dates back to 1925, so we have a good detailed knowledge of what happened post-European settlement. The cutfoot also contains, and the project area also contains old growth research stands. As shown by the Fravor and Pollock illustrations on the lower part of the screen, there's an old growth stand in one of the prescribed burn areas that contains an old growth stand that's about 250 years old, and the histogram on the right shows 3 distinct cohorts of pine within that stand that originated in about 1770 with 2 other cohorts. And the dot diagram there shows the frequency and the distribution of those different age cohorts by the shading of those diagrams. And that's me on the picture there holding a stump that we sampled and sent to Stambaugh for dating and an example of some of the more frequent intervals of fire on the forest. The forest also allows us to conduct this project at a larger scale than typically is done on the Chippewa National Forest. So the project itself is about 500 acres in size, so we're allowed to monitor both different treatments as well as different forest types within that larger landscape. It also allows us to compare it to managed forest conditions, so we have a rich history of harvest activities within the experimental forest that we can allow and compare some of these burning effects to. As well as I said, the known historical fire frequencies within the forest and specifically the project area. So getting into some of the project design and its variables, we'll have 3 treatments: managed area, which is the area in yellow. Up here, units 3 and 4, those were areas that were managed and harvested between 1940 and 1960, but haven't had any management since, and those areas are slated to be burned. An unmanaged prescribed fire, this is the sunken lake boundaries here, this red boundary, so that area had been set aside since establishment of the forest to have no management. So this area in green here is going to be burned, as well as control areas, which is referenced here by the area in gray, where we have control plots within. All these little dots are individual sample points. And within those stands and those treatment cover type combinations, we'll establish and monitor a minimum of 15 plots for that treatment cover type combination. The cover types consist of pine, which is greater than 75% basal area in pine, and mixed pine, which is 25 to 75% basal area. So as I said, we have historic to current tree data. Here's an example of one of the stem maps from 1940 where we have individual trees, diameter, heights, and conditions over time from 1940 to current. And in addition to that, which is mostly tree species, we also monitored understory vegetation, including the shrub layer, as well as forbs and grasses and coarse woody debris. Also, we'll monitor pre- and post-harvest fuels and fire severity, the photo records, which consists of photo documentation of each of the plots, and some light environment variables, which include PAR, densiometer, and as well as leaf area index. And last but certainly not least, what we came to hear more about today, which is blueberries. And now I'll turn it over to Kate, who will tell you more specifics about the blueberry project in general and its importance to the band.
Thank you, Doug. Thank you to everyone who is joining us here today, and I'd also like to extend a great big thank you to Katie Zelanis, who recently left DRM, and she was kind of the key initiators for this project. Also a big thank you to Brian and Todd, who have also been really helpful contacts for us during the life of this project. So Leech Lake is shared management, the Indian Reservation was designated in 1855. The Chippewa National Forest was established in 1908. One half of the Chippewa National Forest lies within Leech Lake Band Reservation, whereas 90% of the reservation is within national forest boundaries. And so you can see that with the green representing the Chippewa National Forest and the brown representing Leech Lake. So it's about 650,000 acres of forest that is shared management. The project has been a wonderful opportunity to enhance collaborative research partnerships in our area, and I want to also extend a great big thank you to Melinda at the Tribal College for all of her help coordinating with us at DRM, the Northern Research Station, and Anita and Colin, our interns. So what do we really know about blueberries? Blueberries are 88% water, and of that, the 12% of solids, many of us know, have dense antioxidants and nutrients that are not only beneficial to humans, but to the rest of the animals and insects in the forest. Berries reproduce by rhizomes, and so they're on a biannual cycle. Anita's probably going to be talking about this more in her section, but for blueberries to thrive, they need to be pruned, and they don't like competition. And the foliage, so to keep the foliage down a little bit, they need the pruning, and that allows them to put more energy into berry production. So one of the most cost-effective ways to prune wild blueberries is either through predation or with mammals or by burning. And so doing so in the early spring or late fall helps trap some of the nutrients that are available in the soil and brings that back into the rhizomes so that we can hopefully see more blueberry production. And that was kind of the start of this project. Why were we doing this project for more blueberries? We're noticing as we're out in the woods that the plants are present, but we're not actually having blueberries present on the plants. So as Doug was explaining, we're looking in to see if it has something to do with the light availability or maybe just not being pruned. So there's a number of factors that we're looking into to see why we have a lack of berries present. So as I stated, they don't like competition, but other benefits to having fire in a fire-dependent community is that it reduces the insects and disease and fungal organisms that accumulate throughout the winter on that snowpack. Blueberries obviously they thrive in our winter climates, so they're exposed to that harsh condition. But once the snow starts melting, then they're exposed to some of these things that might not allow them to thrive. So fire is beneficial for eliminating some of those things that might be hindering them. Blueberries also thrive in a fire-dependent community which has high acidic soil. And so something that I kind of want to point out to people that I've heard is a common misunderstanding of what creates acidic soil. It's not that fire is creating the acidity in the soil. So it's actually the organic matter. A fire-dependent community is a community that has plants that when they lose their vegetation creates that acidity in the soil. Over time, if you had organic matter building up in those areas, we would start to see those forests transition to more of a hardwood forest. It would be many, many, many years, but that eventually would be what we would see happening. So with the reintroduction of fire, we're helping to maintain these forest systems so that we can continue to have blueberries present. The fire helps reduce nutrient pools by burning off the nutrients on that topsoil, and that's what would be accumulating over time. Continued research on this project we have hobo sensors deployed in the area, so we're looking to maybe hopefully get that going in the future. And some other things to consider is, as I was moving through this, blueberries are very dependent on pollinators. And so without pollination, they're not going to produce berries. And I'm kind of reaching out to everybody in the community that's listening to see if anyone would be interested in teaming up on a project with me. If we can maybe look at doing a pollinator visitor study and seeing if not only like competition or if there's other factors that we haven't had an opportunity to research, if that might be what is affecting our blueberry production. And with that, I would also like to just again acknowledge the shared mentorship that this project has given us the opportunity to work with the tribal college. Without our interns, we wouldn't have the resources to even work with the Northern Research Station. It also gives them a great opportunity for training, and we just truly appreciate the funding that we got for this project. So with that, I will pass it over to Anita, and thank you very much.
Hi, my name is Anita. This is my painting that doubles up as a nice little background for an introduction. Okay. I'm happy to be part of this project because blueberries are culturally important, and they are a key food source for the animals in the area, as we found out firsthand when I was a young girl picking blueberries with my mother. We were picking blueberries. I heard a noise behind a little bit of a brush there. Didn't think nothing of it. My mom told me, "You need to get up and walk to the car. Walk, don't run." So I got my stuff. I was only maybe 7, 8 years old. Got my stuff, walked to the car, kind of just swinging everything around. But she was right behind me. She told me to get into the car and get in quickly. So after we got into the car and got going onto the road, I asked her why we were leaving the blueberry patch. She said, "Didn't you see the bear behind the brush?" And I went, "No." I said, "No, I did not see that bear." Didn't smell it either. Anyways, after that, I always made sure there were no other surprises anywhere in that blueberry brush. So the moral of the story is, be careful where you pick. Anyways, that was interesting. Okay, so with this one, the green dots are the data that was collected in 2013. In the summer of 2018, we revisited the black and the green dots. These areas have pine, and there was some mixed hardwoods in there. And not only that, there was a ton of hazel brush. Something that should have taken 10 minutes to get to ended up taking a half an hour or more to get to that site. So that was interesting. So I'm hoping that the fire will bring down the hazel brush back in there so it'll be easier to get around. See, there is a hazel brush, and that means bushwhacking. It wasn't fun. Scratched up all over the place, but the canopy back there is actually gorgeous. In some areas that we walked through, there was no canopy, and we ended up with going through a lot of raspberry brush, blackberry brush, just brush in general. So this internship was a great experience because it gave me a broader understanding of how blueberries depend on fire. This project is a multi-year project. So I would just love to keep going with that project and actually see where it ends up and how the blueberries are either propagating or not propagating so much. So, this is the preliminary findings. The chart that you see there is the beta site here on, well, it was here on the Leech Lake Tribal Campus. That was we set it up about 2 years ago, and I was involved in that too. This, it's showing us that it was very warm with the squiggly line, and then it's the blue line is the soil moisture content. And right where it is showing the red arrow is when it dropped, the bottom dropped out. There was no moisture within the first 20 centimeters of that topsoil. And the reason why I'm saying something like, explaining this, is because we found very little blueberry fruit back in that area, those areas that we were at. There were the plants, but there was no fruit. So we were really kind of looking into what had happened with that fruit production back in there, and there's a few other things that we were looking at, but this is one of the things that kind of popped out at us, because it was a critical time for flowering in the last 2 weeks in May of 2018. There were severe drought conditions with no rain for weeks and unseasonably warm temperatures. But it could be difficult to separate the effects of the fire from the temperate spring season in the years ahead, since this wasn't a good year for berry production. But we should be able to see if there are more plants overall after the prescribed fire. And that would be the end of my presentation, and I'm turning it over to Colin, and thank you for listening.
Bonjour, everyone. Colin Indishnakas. I said my name is Colin Eagle, and I said hello. I am a Leech Lake Tribal College student, graduating with a 2-year degree in liberal arts with an emphasis in science, technology, engineering, and math. I will be graduating this spring. This is the second project that I participated in. Unlike Anita, I didn't grow up picking blueberries, but it is in my blood. The Anishinaabe have gathered blueberries for sustenance for thousands of years. We accessed 74 older plots staked by the Northern Research Station in 2013. As you can see on the map, there's a small black and white trail that split the 74 plots in half, and one side of the trail was control and one side was experimental, but always remaining in a natural red pine stand. As you can see from the picture, when you first get out there, you can notice the foliage from decades of fire suppression. And as Kate has said in the past slides, blueberries are pretty particular about the amount of competition that's around them. Like I said, this is the second project that I have participated in. The first one was with the U.S. Forest Service, the Northern Research Station in Grand Rapids. It really helped prepare me for this type of project, where I was out there with one fellow tribal college graduate. I think the most important way how I learned to do the sites and do the surveys is by being shown by Doug Kastanek. I believe that tribal colleges are a good place to invest for reliable field interns with proper guidance to your students. are more than capable of implementing graduate type work. With this guidance, we came up with, we sifted through the data and produced some preliminary results on our own. Open canopy characteristics were not significantly different between plots with or without blueberry plants. We also came up with a hypothesis that fire will allow blueberries to produce fruit under the new canopy. In order to better understand the unknown variables in blueberry production, we implemented U30 data logger stations, one in control and two in the experimental. The U30 station uses sensors to record soil moisture and soil temps at depths of 20, 40, 60, and 80 centimeters, while also recording solar radiation and producing relative humidity. This device is powered by a battery that is charged by a solar panel attached to the top of the U30 station. This device manages to accumulate data for 6 months without being offloaded, and we are aiming for a 5-year study. Finding blueberries in the sites was rare, but we did manage to observe them in transition between mixed stands to natural red pine stands. While the plants were abundant in natural red pine stands, we could not locate any blueberry fruit. I enjoyed this opportunity to be a part of an internship of this size. I'm pretty excited to see what happens next. We just want to say miigwech to all our collaborators, U.S. Forest Service, Leech Lake Tribal College, and the DRM. Oh, thank you.
All right, well, that's it from us at Leech Lake Tribal College. Thank you for listening.
All right, we'll pause here for questions. So if folks have questions, go ahead and get them typed in the box. And I'm going to go ahead and get the next talk set up while we're looking at the questions too.
This is I just wanted to mention too, one of the novelties of this project that we didn't mention in the presentation was the fact that we had planned to harvest and do a biomass weight on all the blueberry fruits that we found, but since we didn't find any blueberry fruits, mostly because of the dense canopy cover, that part of the project didn't have any data available to us in a pre-burn condition, but we hope to 1 year after prescribed fire to do the same sampling with that plan in mind of actually going out and harvesting the fruit when they're at peak biomass production and finding out not only the change in density of the blueberry plants over time with the treatments, but also their fruit production in a quantifiable way.
Yeah, that's a good addition, Doug. I mean, and do you have, besides that specific project, do you have other ideas in mind? I'm sure you do, but...
Yeah, you know, a lot of it's going to be derived around the compositional changes and successional kind of pathways that we expect to see over time. And, you know, the ability of regenerating another cohort under a canopy is always a tough question to get at in a resource kind of management objectives. We hope to shed some light on whether it's achievable with multiple entries over multiple time periods. Like I said, it's slated in NEPA, which is soon to be approved here for a 15-year project, so at least we'll have a couple entries over a 15-year time span that will allow us to get at some initial questions, and hopefully it'll keep longer term than that.
That'd be good. I see a few people typing. Doug, or any of you, do you know if there's any similar projects going on other forests or with other tribes?
With the specific focus of blueberry, I'm not aware of any. Definitely the successional changes in plant community responses, I would assume, are kind of widespread across the lake states. Maybe not with this landscape goal of a restoration project as we have here, but for sure, certainly on a stand-by-stand treatment level kind of basis. I know at least our office is involved in other ones as well.
Right. Okay. I'm not seeing any. Oh, but
I was going to say, we didn't have any groundbreaking differences in density. The blueberries initially across the treatment cover type combinations, they were on par with all the other active management timber harvesting studies that we've done on the Chippewa. So unfortunately, there wasn't any groundbreaking results to show pre-harvest in this condition, but we have a really good baseline to move forward with, and thanks to the Lake States Fire Science for promoting these internships and allowing these folks from the Leech Lake Tribal College to get their feet wet and get out on a project of this scale.
oh, definitely, sure. Okay. Let's see, we did have a comment here. Red Cliff and Bad River have burned, and Stockton Island off the Apostle Island National Lakeshore with the goal of blueberry restoration. That might
Can
be
I
a
ask a
connection.
question, Jack?
Yeah, that's a good connection.
Yeah, of course.
This is Rebecca. I'm the next speaker, but I was really intrigued by Anita's talking about the interaction with the climate and flowering, so the timing of the blueberry. And I'm just wondering to what extent it's what we're seeing in not having as many blueberries is a combination of kind of the light conditions, but also that interaction between when the plants are flowering and some of the climate changes that are happening.
Well, Anita's pointing at me. I'm Melinda Neville, and I'm a system scientist here. I would say that's really what gets to the bottom of the question of why we've established these research data loggers out near Sunken Lake. Now, we're really fortunate here in Minnesota to have the Minnesota Phenology Network, where we could go back and look at the long-term record of when blueberries have typically flowered, and that's how we made that initial connection. Now, of course,
you're using the data? So I coordinate that. So I'm so excited to hear somebody that's using the data. Yay!
That we downloaded the blueberry flowering dates from that data set and then compared it, and it absolutely coincides with that severe drought condition we saw in late May.
That is so cool.
Well, I'm glad to make you happy. But we don't know the real answer to your question yet, but we hope to find out.
Excellent. Okay. Well, remember, everybody online, feel free to type your questions in the chat box. I'm going to make you presenter, Rebecca, so you should have control and be set to go with your talk.
All right. I want to talk about blueberries now and phenology. So hi, I'm Rebecca Montgomery. I'm a professor at the University of Minnesota in the Twin Cities in the Forest Resources Department, and I am going to talk about a project that I've been involved in for the past 3 years in brushland habitat. This is a collaboration with Lindsay Chartel and Charlotte Roy at the DNR, and I think Lindsay's on the call, and Lee Freilich, to address some of their interests in terms of management of some wildlife management areas. It's also a collaboration with 2 graduate students, Annie Hawkinson and Lori Knossela, and a lot of what I'm going to be presenting is from their work in terms of the data analysis. And it is also the result of Catherine's work. So Catherine Carrier was supported last summer by the Lake States Fire Science Symposium intern grant, and she's not able to participate because she is working with lemurs in Madagascar right now. A little bit of an introduction to brushland habitats for people who aren't familiar with them. They tend to be a fairly diverse ecosystem that is a mix of kind of grassy and sedge habitat interspersed with shrubs, some of which can become very tall and dense, and Annie is buried in this shrub patch in this picture. So they're this heterogeneous mix of shrubs and more low open areas, and they're very important in terms of wildlife. So all these pictures were actually taken at our field sites, and insects and mammals. So they actually support a number of species, including many species that are of special conservation, significant conservation need in the state. And so the goal that the managers have for these sites is really to keep some of those dense shrubs at bay and maintain that mosaic of shrub and open habitats, open patches. And they do this largely through prescribed fire. And these prescribed fires generally happen in the spring because this is a pretty common window for burning based on a number of logistics and safety concerns. Historically, fire occurred in all seasons in these sites, and so one of the questions that came up is, might summer and fall burns be more effective or be maybe part of a toolbox for meeting their goals? And could extending the timing of burning both extend their ability to do burns and maybe have some different outcomes? And so we asked this question at 4 brushland sites in northern Minnesota. 2 of them were on wildlife management area DNR lands, 2 were private lands. I note that all 4 of them are within the ancestral, traditional, and contemporary lands of the Anishinaabe and are part of the ceded territories of 1854 and 1855. At each of these sites, we established 4 different units that represented the different seasons of burns and included a no burn control. And then within each of these, we had sample points that we sampled birds from June 2016 to 2018 and vegetation. And we also did burn surveys. At each of the sample points where we measured birds, we did vegetation surveys in 2 smaller plots that were intended to capture that woody vegetation at the sites. And then once there was fire, we went out and assessed the severity of the fire using top kill surveys of the shrubby vegetation at the sites. This graph this figure shows the burns that have happened to date, and actually the burn part of the study is done, and I feel really proud. I mean, the DNR partners amazingly pulled off 10 burns. I'm not going to talk about data from all these burns because some of them have happened last year, and so we haven't been out to assess them. But we had intern funds from LSFSC last summer and the summer before that has really supported the data that I'm going to present. Next. Okay, so some of the results, I'm going to talk about both birds, vegetation, and fire. Over the course of the 3 years that we've done bird point counts, we've censused 105 different bird species at the site. 26 of them are species of greatest conservation need identified by the DNR. 21 of them occur on the Lake State Fire Science Consortium's fire-dependent bird list. We also found lots and lots of willows, a couple of threatened species, and not too many non-native plants. The most common birds we found were the common yellowthroat and the sedge wren. And one of the things that was not well known prior to this study was the relationship between the birds that occurred in these brushlands and that brushland vegetation. So one of the grad students worked with the data from all of the unburned sections to try and establish these relationships, and found that the stem density, the stem height, and how diverse in terms of heights, like do you have some short, some tall, some medium, or are they all short or all tall? Those all play a role in what birds are where, and that birds select different places. So some birds tend to be more associated with low stem heights and low stem densities, the more open areas, and others with taller shrubs. And so that sort of formed the baseline for thinking about what does burning do to these characteristics, and what does burning do in terms of the bird communities. So I'm going to present some burning results next. So top kill. Overall, and actually I think I showed this last year, and we haven't updated this, so that's still coming, but overall we see that about 75% of stems were top killed in our spring and fall burns, less in our summer burns. This is across the entire unit, and it turns out that one of the differences between the season of burn is how much of the sites actually burned. So for spring and for fall, we had pretty good coverage of the site. 75 to 100% of our sample points burned, whereas in summer, only a quarter of them did. So what we've done with some of the vegetation data is say, okay, well, let's look just at the sites that burned and see whether they differ. And what we find is that for the plots that burned, we see very similar levels of top kill across the seasons. And this suggests that if we were able to burn more of the sites, for example, in summer, we would potentially see similar outcomes to some of the other burn seasons, and that part of the difference among the burn seasons is in how well and how much of the site the fire covers. So how did vegetation respond to these? Not surprisingly, the stem height decreased. So I'm going to show a number of slides like this, both for vegetation and for the birds, and they're basically the fire treatment across the bottom. I'm trying to find the arrow that the other group used so well. So burn, these are our burn treatments, and then this is the difference between pre and post burn. So in our unburned, we see very little change in stem height, which we wouldn't expect, right? They didn't burn, they weren't manipulated. So from year to year, the stem height stayed pretty similar. And then in both summer and fall, we see declines in the stem heights. Interestingly, the spring suggests that there's not, and what I want to point out is that the spring data are actually from over a year later, and this suggests when we look over time, there's really strong resprouting in these sites that returns the stem height to pre-burn levels quite quickly. Stem height diversity was also reduced, so that the fire in some ways homogenized the vegetation, made it less diverse in terms of the variety of different types, different heights. And then when we look at in our size classes, what we see is that it really affected size classes differently. So this is, again, that change in stems, and then these are our height classes, so our smallest stems, and then we get bigger and bigger. This is 0 to half meter to 1 meter, all the way up to greater than 3 meters. And we see that there's some variation among years, even in the unburned, but that we really start seeing differences in these burn sites, and especially in terms of some particular height classes. This is everything together. If we look just at burned only, we see that those differences become pronounced. And in both fall and spring, we see a big increase in our smallest stem group, which represents that resprouting category, reduction in this height that perhaps was most sensitive to the fires that came through. And then interestingly, in summer, not so much increase in that low, potentially suggesting that these summer burns have less resprouting of the vegetation. Okay, so let's turn to bird responses, and I have to watch the clock, I think. Overall, bird total abundance and 4 of our 10 bird species changed significantly after fire treatments compared to our unburned controls. And the changes varied among species. So here's 2 species, yellow warbler and veery. Both of these, depending on the, not always in the same season, but both of these showed declines as a result of fire. If we go back to some of those models of the relationship between birds and the vegetation, both of these were strongly and positively related to stem height. And given that it appears that our stem heights decreased, it's possible that these species were avoiding those burn areas because of the low stem heights, which aren't their preferred habitat. And this just shows that in a cartoon. In contrast, we see that this species, chestnut-sided warbler, actually increased, and this is despite it having the same relationship with stem height. So based on our pre-burn, this should be avoiding. And so we're not really sure why these increased in abundance, but there's a few ideas that I'll throw out after I show a couple more of our patterns. So here's 2 other. We see overall increases in bird total abundance in the burn sites and a decrease in swamp sparrow in the spring. And both of these were in our models of unburned sites really were not, their abundance wasn't related to vegetation structure. So this in the last slide really suggests that vegetation structure is likely not the only factor influencing the habitat selection and where these birds occur after fires. And so some of the things that might be going on are other things related to the vegetation, perhaps related to the vegetation phenology, timing of the life cycle of the plants, or the way they resprout and the timing of their kind of regrowth. Another possibility is alterations in the resources like insects. Most of the birds that responded to fires are insectivores, and so changes in the abundance of insects could have also influenced where they went after fire, and I think it would be a really interesting thing to look at how fire influenced some of these other aspects of the bird habitat in these sites. So to summarize, we see less burned area burned in summer, but similar top kill where things were burned. We see that spring and fall reduce tall shrubs, but tend to stimulate resprouting, whereas our summer data suggests that there's a reduction in shrubs, but less resprouting. And we see really diverse bird responses across the season of burn. And putting these all together to think about management implications, if one of the goals is supporting the most breeding bird species, then promoting woody vegetation structural diversity and a range of patches that vary in height would be a goal. And we think that our data suggests that incorporating both summer and fall fires into the disturbance regime at this site can help managers achieve that goal. given the various associations of the different bird species with the different seasons of burns. And with that, I am happy to take questions. Again, I'd like to acknowledge the team of people that made this possible, as well as our funding sources, which not only includes the Lake State Fire Science Consortium, but also the Minnesota Environment and Natural Resources Trust Fund and our DNR partners. So thanks, and I left enough time for questions, it looks like. So I'd be happy to take questions.
Okay. Thanks, Rebecca. Yeah, it looks like we have a couple people typing. So Matt Tyler asked, did you see differences in woody brush species composition related to burning treatments?
No. So although I say that with a caveat because we haven't gone very deeply into the species composition work yet, one of my grad students, Lori Canosa, is working on doing ordinations of pre and post. But just looking at richness, didn't seem to change a whole lot. The ordinations, if we do them including abundance, not just presence, we may see some changes in the composition. But we didn't see new species showing up on plots. We just saw abundance and structure changes of the woody brush that was there.
All right. We do have some more people typing in, it looks like, to that question. While we're waiting for that, just want to point out you mentioned Lake State's fire-dependent species, and I included that link to a website. Lindsay Sharkell, who is on this webinar, she was a part of that project, kind of teasing out what species are fire-dependent, so you can go to that website and take a look. Still somebody typing. While we're waiting, Rebecca, do you have, I'm sure you have future ideas, but any immediate ones for kind of continued research projects along this line?
Well, so one of the things that has become really apparent is the pretty rapid response of the vegetation, and then this question of birds. Birds are quite variable, and so right now we only have 1 year post-fire data on any, pretty much all of these characteristics. And so one of the things that our team has been curious about is what might happen in the longer term. And then I'm actually interested, have become somewhat interested in kind of the hydrology of these sites. So I'm a plant ecologist partnering with bird people, and I've just been amazed by how much these sites fluctuate in terms of their water levels associated with rainfall events and storms and things. And so I've actually been talking with our hydrologists here about, what that might mean in terms of the feeding into some of the rivers and the hydrology, how the changing brush can affect hydrology, and then also things like carbon in the water, because these are really, really carbon-rich soils. They're organic soils, and so the movement of carbon out of these into our river systems is something that I've been curious about too. None of which is super related to season of burning, except that I think the season of burning and the responses to that would affect all of those things.
Yeah, likely. All right. Let's see. Tim Quinter asked, was there any work to look into location of nutrient stores in the stems and the different seasonal burning treatments?
Yeah, that's so great that you asked that. So that would be something I would love to follow up with, actually. Because that's what I'm wondering is happening with that summer, not resprouting, with our summer burn treatments. Our hypothesis would be that there is exactly what you stated here, that they have fewer nutrients, fewer stored reserves from which to resprout, and that's kind of the physiological reason for the lack of rapid resprouting of that. But we did not collect. It's something that, I think could be interesting to do in the future, collecting those tissues and looking at how carbohydrates change through time in the sites.
Sounds like one more project.
Mm-hmm.
All right. And I see a few more people typing, so we'll give them a few minutes here. If we have any follow-up questions. And Matt asked, will these sites be burned again on some rotation?
Yeah, so these sites, and Lindsay can type in if she has any other insights, but these sites, you know, these brushland sites are regularly burned. The areas we worked in had not had burns for the last 5 or 6 years, but they are, that's part of the way the DNR manages them. I don't know whether they have like a long-term 15-year kind of fire plan for which units and where they burn, but certainly that I assume that because they're part of their management area and they manage with fire, that at some point in the future they'll be burned again.
Okay. Yeah, we can see if Lindsay's willing to type in or not. And I applaud the different seasons of burning, too, exploring that. So, we'll give it a few more minutes to see if we have other questions or comments coming in. And make sure it's for both presentations, too. So if we have any questions related to our Sunken Lake Fire Restoration Project, please type that in, too.
I would throw out to the students and the Leech Lake Tribal College folks is that I do have a graduate student who's working on the Cutfoot this summer and is looking for an intern and would really like to circulate her announcement at the Tribal College. And so I'd love to follow up about doing that after the call.
Well, that sounds great to us.
Good connection. Let's see. Lindsay comments, likely these sites will be burned in the future. DNR also use mechanical treatment to manage these sites as well.
Oh, thanks, Lindsay, because I forgot to mention that mechanical is the other way. That also gives some more seasonal flexibility. I forgot to say that.
Right. All right. We'll hold this for just another minute or so, see if there's any more questions coming in. And while we're doing that, I just want to announce our next webinar, and that's going to be next month. Yes, it is next month, April. So it's going to be on Thursday, April 18th, and that'll again be at 2 p.m. Eastern, 1 p.m. Central. The title is Pine Woodlands and Barrens Restoration, What is Possible with Late Dormant Season Burns. And it's looking at some of the fire studies that have gone on in northwest Wisconsin. It's called the Muckle Barrens site. So you can look at our website for that to get that webinar link. And let's see, we're getting a bunch of thanks pouring in, but I don't see any more additional questions. So if either of you guys have any parting comments, otherwise we'll wrap this up.
No, just thanks from Leech Lake Tribal College for the opportunity to participate, and our website, ltc.edu, if you want to get a hold of any of us at the college.
How about if you type that in the chat box, too, and I'll leave that open so people can grab that if they need to.
Yeah, thanks for organizing, and thanks for everyone for coming and listening to the presentations and supporting the intern program.
All right, well, thanks, everybody. I'll leave this open for a little bit longer here. And this webinar is being recorded, plus the PDFs will be up on the site. I'll get those up on our webpage, or this webinar webpage later today, so you can have access to that, whether you want the PDFs or the recording or just the contact information. So with that, we'll wrap it up, and I appreciate all the effort that went into this. Thanks, guys. All right, we're going to close down here. Bye.
All right, thanks a lot.